Hi everyone, I'm Sidney McKinnon, MD and CIO of Cadiz Asset Management, and welcome once again to another installment of All Things Fixed Income. Today I want to talk to you about an event that happens on our economic calendar. This happens once a year, normally in February, and what I'm talking about is the tabling and the proposal of the country's financial budget by the Minister of Finance. What was unusual this year is that when the budget was to be tabled, it was delayed or postponed because there were one or two contentious, or maybe more than one or two, a few contentious issues or points contained in the budget, which was then not deemed ready for tabling. Well, many parties got involved, all those interested got involved, and this budget was interrogated. And the main contentious point that was in the budget that was to be tabled in February was a VAT or value-added tax increase of 2%. The delay is actually unprecedented. I haven't heard of the budget tabling being delayed or interrogated or sent back until this happened in February. Nevertheless, it was interrogated and eventually the budget was delivered on the 12th of March of this year in a much more palatable form, especially as far as taxation is concerned, especially that of VAT. Now, first of all, what is this budget? Why do we have a budget? And effectively, a budget is a financial plan in terms of your financial goals, and I suppose you can apply it to all walks of life, but in this particular case, in terms of our government, which is handled by the National Treasury. So it's a plan of the financial goals of the country and how are you going to achieve those goals. And this is normally laid out in a statement, a budget statement that is delivered by the Minister of Finance to Parliament, and in our case, in South Africa, normally in February. This year, though, delayed till the 12th of March. Now, a budget normally contains two main components. And I'm speaking very broadly here to get through it quickly. But you have a revenue side, in other words, the money that comes into the government in the form of taxation and the likes, and the collection thereof. That's one example. And then there's the other side, which is the expenditure side of the budget. In other words, how that income is going to be spent. At times, your income doesn't match your expenditure. Very, very common in some households, I'm sure, too. But what happens is that gap then gets filled by what is known as borrowing. So the government also borrows in the form of issuing, for example, bonds, and we are talking fixed income here. So the borrowing requirement obviously is also explained within the budget. This year, though, I'd like to just focus on the adjustments that had to be made. Otherwise, the budget would have been fairly much what was expected. And if you think back to my chat that I had on the medium-term budget statement a little while ago, pretty much the same in most cases, except for the areas of taxation that I've mentioned earlier on. So in terms of the salient features or the salient adjustments that had to be made to this budget when it was delivered on the 12th of March is that, first of all, there is going to be a hike in value-added tax, not 2%, but 0.5% for this year and another 0.5% in the subsequent year. So that is an adjustment that has been tabled and most probably will be implemented as early as in the next month or two. I think by about May, that could very well be implemented. The second component that was scrutinized quite intensely was the personal income tax component. Of course, it's for people like you and I who have to pay personal income tax. And here we saw a clever way of increasing the revenue by government was to not adjust the tax bands. In other words, if you received an increase or you receive an increase, it pushes you into a higher tax bracket, which means that you will be paying more tax. Those brackets are normally adjusted on an annual basis to give you some leeway for inflation. But in this case, this year, they're not being adjusted, which means you automatically, if you get an increase and you do fall into a higher bracket, you're going to be paying more tax. And in that way, on average, the Treasury or the government collects a bit more tax. Then simple little things were also adjusted, subtly in the budget. If you are contributing to a medical aid, for example, those contributions are tax deductible to a degree. And every year, what happens is the amount that you are allowed to deduct is adjusted. This year, that wasn't adjusted, so it means you get the same relief, but of course, accounting for inflation, effectively it means a little bit less relief, which means more collection for the government in terms of the taxes that are collected, or in terms of the amount that can be deducted before tax is collected. Then, of course, we have the usual increases in sin taxes. So those are the adjustments. I'm speaking very broadly here because there's many other facets to the revenue side of the budget in terms of how collections get made, but those are the pertinent factors that were under scrutiny and that had to be adjusted to make it more palatable for everyone to be eventually accepted. On the expenditure side, which is the other side of the coin, this is effectively the spending of the revenue that gets collected, whether it's through taxes or whichever form that revenue gets collected. We see that we still have a very high public service wage bill, and this has been inflated or inflates by about 5.7%. And then, of course, there has to be investment towards infrastructure, and that provision has been made for that in our budget as well, to the tune of 46.7 billion, if I'm not mistaken. And then, of course, there's also expenditure in terms of social grants. I know that an adjustment was made to lower that grant slightly, or the amount that it was going to be increased by, to accommodate the original budget that was proposed, and to accommodate the reduction in VAT from 2% to 0.5%. But of course, this coupled with issues or expenditure issues such as public employment programs, funding South African troops in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and of course, as I said, a smaller allocation to social grants, the minister managed to, or the Treasury managed to, get our budget to a position where it was more palatable. Obviously, there is a process now whereby this goes through the various stages through Parliament till eventually it's accepted by the various committees. So the first step was tabling, but inevitably it probably will be accepted in its current form, not without lots of debate and discussion, I'm sure. The main thing here is that I think it's the first time I've experienced that a proposed budget was sent back for reworking before it even was tabled, and had to have revenues and expenditures adjusted. In the beginning, I spoke about the borrowing requirement in terms of the revenue received and the expenditure that's made, and the shortfall that has to be made up by borrowing. What we notice in this budget is that borrowing requirement hasn't changed that much. So the government won't be borrowing a hell of a lot more, but it does have a bearing on our servicing that debt that we already have. And it's anticipated that our servicing cost will go up slightly over the next year and then start stabilizing, to use the right words, thereafter. Having said all of this, one of the main aims of a good budget is to provide a framework, to provide an environment whereby a country's economy can prosper in terms of its growth. And that is effectively what we need in our country, is less muted growth and more active growth. Unfortunately, at this point in time, the growth projections are fairly muted, and it's now incumbent upon the various programs instituted by government to stimulate our economy to get to a point where we can actually be growing at a rate that is feasible. Many factors involved, not only the local economy, because we're part of a global stage, but I'll be here for the rest of the day if I should go into all of those components. For the time being, though, what has this meant to markets, especially our fixed income market? I think we saw a little bit of volatility in the beginning when the budget was not announced, because no investment market or no investor wants uncertainty or unknowingness. We want predictability. We want to know what is happening. But once the budget was tabled by the 12 things that calmed down in the market, and we saw our bond market, which is very resilient, absorbing or assimilating information very quickly, look towards the fundamental factors that are within our economy to find direction, not only locally but also abroad. So hopefully this session has given you some insight into the latest budget, how it's affected the fixed income market, and what the adjustments were that were made in order to make the budget more palatable overall. I thank you for your time. This is Sidney McKinnon, MD and CIO of Cadiz Asset Management.